Good morning. Today I'm going to begin a short series of talks on what we call the gospel. Gospel is a word you may have heard when, for instance, someone says, "I'm telling the gospel truth," to indicate how true their truth really is. It's really true if it's gospel true. But in fact, that's not what gospel means. Gospel is an old word that simply means good news. Another old English word meaning the same is Godspell, from where we get the musical Godspell starring David Essex. Now, if you don't know who he is, I would suggest you ask your parents, or maybe even your grandparents, and guess what? I'm now feeling quite old. So today I'm going to begin telling you good news, but it won't seem like that to start. At first it might seem like bad news, but stick with me and you'll hear not just good news, but the best news. News that's been proclaimed for 2,000 years, but is still as fresh and as powerful as on the day it was first heard. The gospel begins with God. Everything that is good begins with God. We need to appreciate who He is if we're to understand the gospel. But we also need to appreciate that the God of the Bible is beyond our understanding, and you may not get Him. Now that's a good thing. Why would anyone want to worship a God that we understand? If we can fit God into these tiny minds, He can't be much of a God, can He? I love it that God is so great, so amazing that I will never understand Him. There's a verse in the Bible that I've always found helpful. It's in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11 and verse 6, which says about God, "Anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him." God has never taken the time to prove His existence. He just declares to us, "I am," as His name. I am the one who has always been and always will be. I am the one who exists outside time and space and am not constrained by their boundaries. I am eternal, and I am your creator. God won't prove Himself to us. Why should He? He asks us in faith to accept that He exists, and to make that faith worthwhile, He rewards those who seek after Him. And it's well worth seeking. Although God won't prove His existence, He's given ample evidence of it. Psalm 19 and verse 1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands." The wonder of this universe is evidence of God's existence. Whether we use a telescope to look up or a microscope to look down, the big and the small all indicate a mind behind creation, a planner, a designer, someone who has carefully thought out and constructed a universe that is beautiful in every aspect and that is all fully interdependent. If I asked you to describe God, you'd probably end up describing God the Father, as most do. Your view of Him may be based on that amazing painting by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican City, where God is looking down on Adam, who is looking up at God, and both have a hand outstretched with 4 fingers nearly touching. You may have a different view of God that's been affected by your past. Perhaps a version of your own father. And therefore you might envision a stern God who just wants to control you. Or you might have a God who's a big softy, who doesn't interfere with your life, but He's there when you need Him. You know, whatever view you have of Him, it will be wrong. God the Father, who we tend to picture, has never been seen. Jesus Himself told us that. He said, "No one has seen the Father except the one who is from God. Only He has seen the Father." Now the one who is from God is Jesus Himself, but we'll come to Him later in the series. Suffice it to say, what Jesus has said is the common view of Christians, borne out by what we read in the Bible. No one has seen God the Father, and therefore we cannot describe him. Now we get to the point where you'll be unable to understand what I say. But bear in mind, that's good. You won't understand it not because you're not intelligent enough, but because it's a concept outside human experience. It only exists, as far as we know, within God. The Bible teaches us that there is one God who reveals himself to us as three persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Each one is God, and together they are the one God. Have you got it? I hope not. Just accept it as all that God has revealed to us. And don't reject it just because your mind can't process it. It's good that we have a God who is beyond our greatest thought. And sadly, many have gone astray because they just could not get this concept that God is greater than our greatest thought. This God that the Bible talks about has a number of attributes that are always true of him all the time. Imagine, if you like, a juggler who juggles 2 balls, then 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. God's attributes are like juggling balls that he is keeping up all the time. He never drops any, and he never puts any aside. God's attributes include love, wisdom, faithfulness, kindness, righteousness, justice, and anger. He's all-powerful and knowing, infinite and unchangeable. All these attributes and more besides describe God, and they were always full on, seen in their absolute perfection and awesomeness. Now, I think it's fair to say we like the idea of a God of love and kindness, but we're not so keen on a God of justice and anger. The thing is, we can't have one without the other, because God is always displaying all of these attributes, and rightfully so. We have to have a God who can be angry and who will punish sin. But this is one of those bits that doesn't seem like good news. We'd rather not be told this. Let's just have the good things about God, but we can't. He's an all or nothing God. He must act in justice when he knows something is wrong and needs to be punished. And he has every right to be angry when we do something that upsets him. In his love, he can forgive, but at the same time his righteousness has to be satisfied. Would anyone like to be God for a while? No, nor me. But I'm thankful that I have a God who always gets it right. The Bible tells us that God created the universe and all that exists within it. He created man to enjoy his creation, but we chose instead to rebel against him and ruin his creation. But that's for next time. Thank you for listening, and join me at the same time next week to hear about man and what man did to make God's good news necessary for us. Thank you.